Hi everyone, thank you for coming, and thank you Dara for that very kind introduction. I know you're not the only one that has to leave early, so I don't mind if people need to get up and leave, and it's kind of a busy day. I was thrilled to be invited back to Augie to speak today. It's been just about a year, like Dara said, since I graduated and left the Augie nest, so to speak, and I'm glad to be back. I've been really impressed so far today by the new setup that you guys are working with the Celebration of Learning. I think it's great to have so much of it centralized in the new CSL. I wish that building was functional while I was here. I toured the first poster session this morning and was shocked by the amount of interaction that was happening between students and between faculty, as well as the diversity of the topics. Everything from biology to religion to philosophy to poli-sci to engineering, everything was represented in that poster session. And I really hope that that type of symposium where students can show off their hard work and really get involved and invested in each other's works will take root and thrive here. You'll better understand my enthusiasm as I get into the main part of my talk about that kind of thing. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've been doing this past year. And like Dara said, I've been spending the last year as a graduate student at CU Boulder in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. It's kind of a mouthful, we just call it MCDB. And if all goes according to plan, I should be leaving that department in 5 or 6 years with a PhD. At that point, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I think I have plenty of time to think about my options and explore different routes after I get my PhD. So this first year as a graduate student has been awesome. I've met some incredibly intelligent people who have made huge contributions to our modern understanding of cellular biology. It's been awesome getting to know them and hearing their stories and the history behind the department and what they've done to push the field forward. And I think that Colorado is a great place to live as a continuing student and as a young professional. There's a culture surrounding outdoor activities that just doesn't really exist here. Everyone has their own thing that they like to do, whether it's skiing and snowboarding or backpacking or mountain climbing or bicycling, running, everything. I personally like the bicycle. I just bought a new bicycle and am able to ride into the Rocky Mountains from my apartment, just hop on a bike path and ride west out of town into the mountains a couple times a week. Just being that close is crazy coming from the Quad Cities where we get to look at the Mississippi, which is beautiful, but a little bit different than the Rocky Mountains. Our proximity and access to that kind of atmosphere makes living a healthier lifestyle really easy, and it makes doing school and having a profession there fun. Speaking of healthy lifestyles, there's also a thriving beer culture in Denver and Boulder. It seems like every restaurant has their own microbrewery, and they're everywhere. They're mostly pretty good, I've heard. Despite all that, I managed to spend most of my time at school or in the lab. This first year of the program, we serve as TAs for some of the bigger undergraduate classes in the department. We take a couple of graduate classes of our own, and we work in 3 different rotation labs throughout the year, sort of like trimesters, or kind of like trial periods to see if you fit well in that lab atmosphere and like the kind of research that they're doing and have something to contribute to that field. Of those 3 labs, the thesis lab is typically chosen, and the students spend the next few years, whether it's 5 or 6 or sometimes more, on research and accumulating publications before graduating with a PhD. Personally, I'm taking the road less traveled and very recently decided to do a 4th rotation, which starts in a few days next week, in a lab where I'm really interested in the work. He wasn't the guy that runs the lab wasn't able to take students earlier in the year, but he is now, and I'm going out on a limb a little bit and taking this opportunity to pursue that opportunity. All of this stuff keeps me pretty busy, and the rest of the students pretty busy throughout the year. And my transition from that, or to that professional scientific atmosphere, where day in and day out just kind of flooded in scientific thoughts and jargon, from Augie, where I was able to and enjoyed taking non-major, non-bio, non-science classes, has been interesting. And before I get to the meat of my talk, I want to give a shout out to the professors here Teaching, as I found out this last year, is a lot harder and more time-consuming than I thought it would be. I have a newfound respect for what you guys do on a daily basis, year in and year out. I also want to point out how much higher the standard of teaching is here than at Boulder, at least. I was one of 12 TAs last fall for an introductory class of about 500 students. 400 of those 500 students were in the same lecture hall, which dwarfs this one. It was just gigantic. You could barely hear the people in the front of the room. Like I said, 400 of those 500 were in the same lecture, and they were supposed to be at least. Attendance dips to about 70% for most of the semester, and nobody really bats an eye. It's hard to keep track of that many students. It's unfeasible for the professors to design activities for everyone, or to make everyone feel engaged and follow the material. The fault, I want to mention, in no way lies with the professors that I've worked with, at least. They're two of the hardest working, caring professors that I know. They put a lot of time and effort into honing the content of the class toward specific goals, getting feedback from students, and improving the overall experience of the class. The sheer numbers of the students makes it difficult, though, as you can imagine. The moral of the story is that I wouldn't trade my small school undergraduate education for 10 anywhere else. I admit that that type of large-scale education works well for some people, but I don't think I'm one of them. I enjoy knowing my professors and them knowing me. If I had questions after class, I could go straight to the professor. I didn't have to wait in line between 15 other people who had gotten there first, which happens a lot. These are things that make an education in a place like Augie unique, I think, and I appreciate them now more than ever. I used to suspect that a biology degree from Augustana was a different beast than a biology degree from most other schools. But that suspicion was really driven home over the past year. Interacting on a daily basis with other graduate students who, with few exceptions, have been educated at large universities all around the country has shown me how special my time at Augie really was. I think you can count on one hand the number of liberal arts graduate students in my department. And of about 50 students, there are maybe 5. And even among them, I think you'll find that liberal arts educations aren't all created equal. Most of them aren't really that liberal arts. I don't mean to suggest that a traditional education is any better or worse than my own. In fact, I think there are some real benefits to that style of training that gave many of my peers a head start over me last fall. You can imagine the amount of specialized content and technical jargon that comes along with a field like molecular biology, a lot of which was foreign to me 9 months ago when I started, whereas many of my peers were bored with how repetitive it was for them. They had learned about the beta-catenated signaling pathway 3 or 4 times in the past 2 years, and I had probably heard it mentioned once or twice in the class. This is no fault of Augustana's biology department, I want to point out. I just don't know if this school is big enough to support the type of department that my peers were trained in. I also didn't take a few classes here that, in retrospect, might have prepared me to be on level pegging with them from the get-go. But I'd like to think, at this point, that I have since caught up with the pack, and I am poised to pass my more traditionally educated peers, thanks in large part, I think, to the liberal arts and the things I'll be talking about shortly. I'm sure there are students here at different points in their Augustana careers, and I want you to know that only since graduating have I really found the words to describe my education in the liberal arts. The rest of my talk is a work in progress, too. My reflection on my education in the liberal arts is an ongoing process. It's changing, and I'm sure it'll continue to change. You're getting a snapshot of what a young graduate like myself thinks about his experiences here at Augustana. I want to first share with you, though, a story about where my journey started with the liberal arts. I remember very clearly an existential crisis I had after committing to Augustana during my senior year of high school. I grew up right outside the Quad Cities and come from an extended family that was nearing the double digits of Augustana alumni before I had even enrolled here. There was surprisingly little pressure from my family to choose Augie, but with my interest in biology and the strong biology department here, it was a no-brainer. As I was applying to schools, I had heard the term liberal arts thrown around by my parents and siblings, but it never felt like an important aspect of my future education. I was wrong, clearly. At my graduation party at then high school, I remember, sorry Mom and Dad, I remember lying and playing along when my friends, family, and teachers would ask me about going to a liberal arts school like Augustana College. They all treated it like it was this huge decision that I was making to do a liberal arts education over a more traditional route, considering my interest in biology. And this is true. I had no idea what it meant. I was just rolling with the punches, as I found is my strength and my weakness. It finally hit me this summer before my first year here as a student. I was in the car with my mom and her uncle, my uncle, her brother, and we're both proud Augustana alumni, and they started reminiscing about what the liberal arts had meant so far in the context of their own lives, and it scared the hell out of me. What was I getting myself into? Why hadn't I tried harder to find out more about the liberal arts before I committed to 4 years of this kind of education and a major life decision in a seemingly outdated and idealistic approach to education? I wanted to study science, not history. I was concerned with what makes the human body and mind tick, not the symbolism embodied by a fictional character in a piece of literature. The thought of spending time on something other than my major seemed incredibly wasteful. At the time, I wanted to go to college, learn as much of biology as I could, especially human biology, get into medical school and be a brain surgeon. I have so far only ended up doing half of those things, so that can tell you about how your plans can change through college too. But back to the story, since it was already too late, I kept rolling with the punches and decided to see what I could get out of Augie. I'm not here to give you my life story, nor am I here to sell you on Augustana or the liberal arts. Someone's obviously done that already, that's why you're in these seats. I wanted to share how the liberal arts have shaped my brief experiences beyond Augie's walls, and I wanted you all to know that I was far from sold on its philosophy when I was first a student here. My hope is that you'll take in the rest of my talk and think critically about how the liberal arts approach can impact your own goals and aspirations. I'm going to start by spoiling all the suspense and tell you right now the 4 things that I learned from Augie that play the biggest role in my day-to-day life as a graduate student now, a year later. These are also things that I hope you'll keep in mind throughout my talk and afterwards. I didn't realize their worth until I had already graduated, and my hope is that you might gain by knowing them now while many of you are still students. Number 1, even the most complex concepts can be broken down into simpler concepts. Number 2, even the most disparate concepts can be related to one another. Number 3, there's no such thing as having too many friends. And number 4, there's no such thing as having too many skills. I can understand if you think number 1 and 2 sound pretty similar, but I'm going to explain how they're actually 2 sides of a coin that have helped me grapple with the sheer volume and complexity of information that I'm expected to absorb on a daily basis. My suspicion and hope is that this strategy is applicable beyond molecular biology, and it can help at least one person in this audience understand something they wouldn't have otherwise. I don't know if you caught it or not, but my word choice there was purposeful. I said understand, not just learn and definitely not memorize. Learning and memorizing, to me, are more superficial forms of mental growth. To understand a concept is to know its ins and its outs, to know its parts, how it was built, and how to rebuild it from scratch if you had to. That right there is the crux of my first point. Even the most complex concepts can be broken down into simpler ones. And I'll explain that further. Sometimes we're exposed to concepts that seem beyond our ability to think on that level. We might play along and maybe get the gist of it enough for a test or something, but we don't necessarily understand it. I find more often than not that kind of information leaves and slips out of my head within a couple days of learning it. I know I'm confronted with this dilemma regularly in school, but I try to make an active and conscious effort to break down difficult concepts and work to understand each of their constituent parts. Sometimes you have to even break down those parts into smaller, simpler parts to be able to truly understand them, or the whole. I know how common sense this sounds, right? You just take a concept, you look at the different parts of it, you try to understand those. But it seems from my personal experience that it can be discouraging to confront such a daunting concept, and that it seems much easier just to stay ignorant than to attempt to understand something that complex. I want to give an example. This is a title taken from an article that was assigned for my graduate level class a couple weeks ago. The role for the ubiquitin proteasome system in the vacuolar degradation of ST6P, the A-factor transporter Saccharomyces cerevisiae. With a romantic title like that, the authors could not lose. As complicated as it sounds, this is far from immune from being broken down into simpler concepts. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a species of yeast that's often used in genetics research. When these yeasts decide that they should mate, they secrete one of the two factors, A or alpha, which alerts surrounding yeast that they are ready to mate. These factors have to be transported in or out of the yeast, and that's where ST6P comes in, like it says in the title. The cell doesn't have to have that protein ready all the time. It doesn't want to mate all the time. So it has to have a way to break it down into smaller molecules that can be used for other purposes around the cell. This particular article focuses on the pathways that allow that molecule to be broken down effectively. Simple, right? So, I digress, but I'll tell you again from my personal experience. Write it on your hand if you have to. Breaking things down into simpler concepts can be an easy tool to overlook or ignore. Every concept, idea, theory that you encounter as a student or elsewhere in life can be broken down into simpler parts. No concept, at least in science, is floating in midair without support. They're all built from the ground up with a structural foundation that allows that concept to exist. If such a foundation can't be found, then there's every reason to doubt the validity of that concept. Being ignorant of the facts isn't an excuse. With the extent of information that can be easily found and navigated on the internet these days, there's no reason for anyone with internet access to stay ignorant of things that they care to know. From my experience, deconstructing concepts can help you understand ideas that already exist. This is a great, simple, and extraordinarily helpful tool as a student, I have found, but it lacks a certain something. There's an emphasis in higher education and in the world of academia that I now find myself in to create new ideas in order to contribute to a developing field of study. Just pulling someone else's idea apart and studying its guts isn't, on its own, as I've described it so far, a creative process. That's where my second point comes in. Even the most disparate concepts can be related to one another. And this, for me, gets at the fundamental importance of relationships between ideas. There are an infinite number of kinds of relationships that can be found in our world, not all of which are physical. Sure, my shoes are touching the floor, my hands are connected to my wrists. These are important physical relationships, but I need to focus more on the abstract relationships between ideas. Maybe this is just me, but have you ever sat down and actually thought about the ideas floating around in your head and how they're related to one another? It's crazy. There are innumerable ways for bits of information in our minds to be organized into more complex ideas. These relationships are what allow for bigger, more complex concepts to be born, like the ones I mentioned earlier. I think of these relationships as the tools of creativity, the glue that holds the pyramid of ideas together as it reaches new heights. The independent bits of information are nothing without the relationship that binds them together. Thinking about and identifying these relationships is a great first step, but you can go further. By contemplating and practicing applying these types of relationships to new ideas and concepts, completely novel connections can be made. This is the creative aha moment that we've all felt. Forgive a brief foray into neuroscience, but I want to assert that it is a built-in function of our brains to test out these new relationships. We do this in order to reconcile our experiences in the world with an ever-changing, best-fit model in our minds of how the world actually works. I think we should appreciate what evolution has given us and leverage this innate ability against any stubborn problem that needs solving, ever. It takes practice to hone this skill and appreciate its potential, but that is where a liberal arts education can help. It can provide structured practice where you're instructed to think about things in new and different ways, turning the crystal, to borrow a common phrase from President Balls. Take an astronomy class, understand its content and its relationships, and apply those relationships in the context of a history class. Do the same with geology and literature, chemistry and philosophy. Content is important, but equally important is the glue that holds each subject into a cohesive whole. Actively and consciously building a meshwork in your mind, learn to navigate ideas and make connections in new ways, and you'll be an all-star at problem solving in no time. The qualities of an education at Augustana make practicing this skill really easy. Just take every class seriously, and like I said, actively put those relationships you learn in one class to work in the context of your other classes, and vice versa. Organized efforts like this new celebration of learning are great ways to incubate the type of multidisciplinary interactions that I believe are crucial in the approaches that I've outlined just now. You have the freedom to explore here mentally and in different classes, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. It's not always so easy to do once you leave Augustana. And if you find yourself struggling, just ask a friend for help. And that brings me to my third point. There's no such thing as having too many friends. I want to clarify that I don't mean this necessarily in a professional networking or social context, though those are very, very important parts of college that shouldn't be ignored. I mean this in a more relevant way to my talk thus far. Every one of you has led a different life and had a unique set of experiences. As a result, your minds and the minds of everyone you've ever known, or ever will know, or have ever existed are different. Think about that for a second. What an incredible resource that diversity of mind can be. The open exchange of ideas between people is a quick way to learn new ways to understand concepts, really understand them, and to create relationships between ideas in new ways. Adopt someone else's point of view, put your feet in their shoes, wiggle your toes, and see how it feels. Not only can we internally process and create ideas, but we can tap into that same mechanism in every other human mind through language. I could go on a whole tangent about how important communication and language is, but that's for another day. Whether you like it or not, this exchange of ideas that I'm talking about is actually happening right now between me and each of you. I'm doing my best to convey the content of my mind about how learning in a liberal arts atmosphere can be a powerful experience. And you're hopefully getting an insight into how those constituent concepts are related in my head. You never know. Those relationships that you're experiencing me communicating might apply to something in your own life that will allow you to understand it in a whole new way. So far, I've used this stage to share some abstract ideas of my own about how a serious approach to the liberal arts can open up new ways to understand and create ideas. But I want to move on to my fourth point, which is a little more grounded. There's no such thing as having too many skills. While I was here at Augie, I was pretty involved in Greek life and OSA, which is OSL now. They were fun ways to get involved outside of the classroom, and I enjoyed giving back to the student body by organizing OSA events. I would have been the first one to tell you, though, that they would have zero bearing on my life after Augustana. I was continuing my education in a hardcore scientific field, and I had no professional need for organizing events, feeding large groups of people, or keeping a few dozen friends from tearing at each other's throats over something trivial. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that I was completely wrong. Even in the first year of graduate school, I realized how applicable those skills that I learned here at Augie really are. I'll give you a few examples to communicate my point. Last fall, my department had its semi-annual retreat to Vail. Hotel rooms had to be booked, meals had to be planned, poster sessions and talks had to be scheduled, and guess which grad student had experience doing this kind of thing and was able to help? This guy. Every winter, my department hosts about 30 prospective grad students over a handful of weekends in order for them to interview with faculty and explore Boulder. Guess who helped organize their meals, lodging, activities? Boom. Just a couple weeks ago, a professor that I worked for hosted a cancer cell biology symposium on campus where the students from his undergraduate class could present posters and talks on topics of their choice. Guess who helped organize their meals and schedule to make sure that everything ran smoothly? This guy. It's kind of an odd skill for a young scientist to have, I guess, but it gets to my point. I didn't share those experiences so you can all pat me on the back. I shared them to illustrate how universal skills can be. Regardless of what you enjoy doing outside of the classroom, I almost guarantee that there is a use for those skills in your future. There's more to a job than what's in the description. What I'm saying is to get involved outside of the classroom, if you haven't already. Find something you like to do and invest part of yourself in it. I know a few people here in the audience that are doing just that, and I'm proud of them for it. Learn skills, get leadership experience, and you'll be better for it. College is an excellent time to cultivate those skills and interests. And Augie has no shortage of clubs and other ways to get involved. I'm going to wrap this up in the next couple minutes, but I want to put everything together for you one more time. Everything I've said so far are reasons to take a liberal arts education seriously. I urge you students especially to be active in your education by employing the information that I've shared with you. Or better yet, create something of your own that works even better for you and pass it along. I'm sure some of you are questioning my right as a very recent graduate to be prescribing life lessons at all. And you're absolutely right. I want to emphasize that everything I've said is based on personal experience. These are things that have helped me, and I want to share them with you so that they might help you. For all I know, it all sounded like gibberish to you. These are things that I've learned to appreciate from my time at Augustana that I believe set the liberal arts apart as an education style. I practice every day what I've preached to you, and it has helped in my transition to my current place in life from a place like Augustana. Every concept can be broken down into simpler concepts. Every concept can be related to any other concept by virtue of the relationships that bind them together. There's no such thing as having too many friends, and there's no such thing as having too many skills. I hope that I've given you some food for thought that might spur you, whether you're a student, a professor, a parent, whatever, to consider how you, as an individual, think about and encounter the world around you. Don't stop learning and connecting ideas, ever. I want to thank you all for listening to me on my soapbox. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, whether they're about living in Boulder, the kind of research I do, the topic of my talk, whatever. I'm new to this sort of forum, so I'll do my best to answer your questions. And I also want to thank Augustana for inviting me back to talk to you and to participate in the celebration of learning. So thank you.